Wonderful. I had a fellow choir member ask me, now why did Huey ask you to talk about Wells Cathedral? And I said, well, it was the first cathedral I ever visited back in 1987. And I've been there many times since then, at least a dozen times since. I've been in the attic 4 times. And it's still my favorite one. I've visited, like Richard said, I've visited many cathedrals in England and all over the world, really, when I'm around one, and it's still my favorite. And one of the reasons it's my favorite is because it's in the smallest town in England. They have to have a cathedral to be a town. And so it's very authentic. It looks like it did in the medieval times to me. So instead of making sort of a presentation, I put together a smaller number of the pictures that I have, and I want to sort of go through it as if I was taking you on a tour of the cathedral. And that's sort of my idea today. So we're going to go really fast, I think, through a lot of these. First off, here's an aerial view. I want to give credit to Chris Cookman Photography. I was looking for some aerial shots to show you how the building is shaped and the architecture about it, and he kindly gave me permission to use some of his stuff, and it's any aerial piece you see here is going to be his. Okay, so you've got the cathedral here, the main cathedral. There's also what's called the Vicar's Close here. I'm going to go into a lot more detail about this stuff, but it's a medieval street where the choristers and the clergy live. There's a chapter house, a cloister here. There's a bishop's palace here, and the thing that the town is named after is a spring, Wells. I looked at it for the first time in '87. I was heading to England and I was going to Arthurian sites, King Arthur. I'm a fan of King Arthur. So I was driving from Stonehenge to Glastonbury. Glastonbury is about 30 miles down the road from Wells, and it's where King Arthur and Guinevere were buried, supposedly. And I saw Wells on the map, and I said, man, there's got to be a spring there. And sure enough, there was. So this place was settled in Roman times, and the title of my presentation was Wells Cathedral, not ancient, but really rather old. You have to be Roman or before. The fall of Rome was in 476 to be ancient, but the cathedral, the first church was commissioned there in 704. Okay, it was the Anglo-Saxon king Ine. Don't quote me on the pronunciation. And there was a bishopric established there in 909. Wells was granted its first royal charter as a town in 1201. So this place has been around a while. The first bishop the bishop that commissioned the cathedral, it was in 1100. And there were 2 phases of building. It started in 1180 and finished in 1345. So the famous thing about Wells is this west front. This is the west front of the cathedral. There are over 300 statues on it, and at the time it was the most statues of any one place in the world. Here's the main square of the town. This gate goes into the cathedral. You can see the tower in the background, and this gate goes to the bishop's palace. This is called the Penniless Porch, because the beggars used to sit there. This is the gate as you go in. And that's the cathedral cat. You'll meet him, Basil, if you go in the main gate. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the architecture for a minute. Most cathedrals are built in a cross pattern. How many of you have been to a cathedral? Okay, so you sort of know this thing. So the nave is here. This is the west front, the long nave, the crossing, they call it, with the north and south transepts. And then the choir is here, and the main altar is going to be in the east. And in this case, we have a lady chapel that was tacked onto the back of it on the east side. This is the view of the nave. Wells Cathedral, about 20 years after it was built, the center tower, the walls started to crack. And I'm going to show you a picture of this is actually the center tower of Salisbury Cathedral. Those are the choir that are going. Y'all are going to visit Salisbury. There's some parallels between these two cathedrals. But can you see the bend in the column there? It's starting to bend. They had a similar thing at Wells, and back in the 1300s, the architect developed these scissor arches, they call them. It's the only place in the world that those things exist like this. And there are three of them around the organ got in the way on the east side, but there are three of them that support that central cathedral. So that's sort of a signature of Wells. This is looking up at the base of the tower and into the nave. There's the cathedrals were all painted. All those statues on the front were these wild colors back in the day. Now, during all this time, a lot of that paint has gone away, and they've never repainted it. But the people at Wells found the pattern for these stencils that are on the ceiling, and they've redone them. And you can see how bright it would have been. See how they've done this arch here. The next thing I wanted to talk about was carving and stonemasons. Stonemasons were the builders of these cathedrals, and it's one of the oldest professions in human history, and they had a lot of time on their hands, a lot of the guys that were standing around, so they did a lot of interesting carvings. So you walk into a cathedral like this, and you don't notice until you start looking around and you start seeing these strange people. They're sort of hidden. This is a pilgrim. There's a guy with a crutch. There's what, sort of you expect to see is, a saint with a cross. Then you start seeing some more interesting thing. That little squirrel is whispering to the guy. This guy, and Wells is funny about this guy's getting a splinter out of his foot. The guides will tell you about this. Look at him, his face. That guy's at the top of the column, and you don't expect to see him with all the decorative stuff around him. This guy's got a toothache. This guy's got a toothache too. There's one whole column in the south transept is a story of thieves stealing from an orchard. And then it shows them as you go around the column. I didn't get all the pictures. The farmer catching them and hitting them over the head. There's a guy hunting a fox. I think he's a stonemason with his tools. Then you get some sort of surprised looks and a few sort of strange monsters. This one's sort of spooky. He's sort of hidden up in there. And it's funny because you don't really realize until you start looking that those things are all sort of stuck, hidden in there. It's wonderful for kids. Wells is known for having their alligator. What? Do they have alligators in England? I like that guy. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next place. The next place we're going to start talking about is the choir. In England, they spell it with a Q, Q-U-I-R-E. This is the main altar in the nave. Let me talk about that for a minute, because the choir is the center of the cathedral, and that's where the offices were held. There are 8 choral in a what do we call it? Help me out here, Huey. Here we go, daily divine office. There are 8 offices. And so you had the priests that would come in the morning and the evening all through the day. And evensong is a combination of the last 2 offices, which is vespers and compline. But they would worship in the choir in the central part of the cathedrals. The peasants and the people that were not affiliated with the running of the church would worship in the nave, and there were no chairs in there, they just stood up. But the priests were also, and the clergy were also standing during the service. So this is the choir. You go in underneath the organ there, pipes we saw. And there are the choristers. So here you have the choir north and south, and then this is the main altar of the church there at that point in the choir on the east side. The bishop's chair, a cathedra, that's where you get the name cathedral, is from the bishop's chair. It's right here. It's the last chair on the east side toward the altar. And in Wells, I'm going to talk about this in a minute a little bit. The embroidery in the choir is phenomenal in Wells. It's unique to Wells. I'm sure there's some embroidery and all, but this is just over the top. In fact, they have a special tour, an embroidery tour that you can go on, and they'll talk about the embroidery. And I'm going to skip through that because it would take me too long. But I did have some pretty good pictures of it. This is looking to the west from the altar. I'm standing sort of in front of the altar and looking toward the organ there. So that's the choir to the west. There's a lot of carving in the choir too. Not only the stonemasons, but the wood carving on the screens. Here's my embroidery guide. He was one of my guides when I did the embroidery tour. Wells is known for its swans, and you'll see why in a minute with the bishop's palace. That's sort of the town symbol. The Magnificat, we're going to be singing that every evensong. I thought that was interesting. There's a kangaroo. Look at the angel wings. Look at the intricacy of that. This embroidery was done by a group of embroiderers in the 1930s through 1952. They had a big, during the war, they had a big contribution to embroidery in the cathedral. A lot of them are the heraldry of the medieval bishops that served there. Then we've got Mark, Luke, John. That's where we're going to be sitting when we do evensong as the choir. We'll be sitting in those chairs. And then I want to talk about the misericords for a minute. The clergy during the services stood during the services. So on the walls, against the back walls of the choir, there were some little shelf things that you could fold down. They call them misericords, which is a Latin word for mercy seat. And what it is for those of us that have trouble standing for a long time, you could sort of lean back against those things and sit down. Well, the wood carvers really had a heyday with those because since people were sitting on them, they didn't think it was appropriate to have divine or holy inspired, biblically inspired carvings on them. So they gave the carving guys liberty to do some sort of interesting things. So you'll see all kinds of, this one in fact is probably close to some type of religious symbol because it looks sort of like St. Michael killing the dragon. But this guy is dancing, I think. There's a dragon. You get all kinds of very interesting things. Wells doesn't have as many of those as some of the cathedrals do, but there's some that are elephants. Nobody had seen an elephant. Well, not many people had seen an elephant in England back in the Middle Ages, so a lot of times you see elephants that have horses' hooves for feet, that kind of thing. That's some friends of mine at an evensong service. I was sitting in Wells Cathedral evensong when Queen Elizabeth passed away. We left that service and went back to the Airbnb and heard the news. That's the roof of the choir, or the ceiling of the choir. And I'm going to move on into, let me look at my time, move on into stained glass here. We've got medieval stained glass. This is the main east window from the choir, and of course the Lady Chapel's behind that. But this window is a Jesse window. There are several of them in the world, but the Jesse window shows the lineage of Christ from Jesse. So here, and I'm going to show you some close-ups in a minute. This is Jesse. They show him sleeping usually, and I'm not really sure why. But most of the windows I've seen that are Jesse windows have him sleeping. And you'll see the white, see the vine as it goes through. It goes through the whole window, all through the progenitors of Christ. And of course, they don't have them all in here. Here in the center is Mary with the Madonna and child. And then at the top, you see Jesus on the cross. This is interesting because the first tour I did of Wells, they were talking about that cross, and they said it's a green cross. And green was sort of rare back in that time to be able to use it for stained glass. You don't see a lot of green in general, but look at all the green in this one. Green was considered a symbol of the resurrection because it's the green, the new life, and that's why the cross is shown as green in this window. There's Jesse sleeping, and that's the beginning of the line as it goes around the window. There he is again. There's Mary, the Madonna. Here's King David with his harp. You see him? And there's Jesus on the green cross. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these are just general stained glass all through the rest of the place. You see born and died. There's some of these are Victorian. You go on into the Victorian times. I like this one in particular. It's Mary Magdalene at the resurrection, at the tomb. I always look for Mary Magdalene. And then here's this is more of a Victorian time frame too. This one. I know enough about English history to maybe fill up a little cup, but during the Civil War and Reformation, Cromwell's troops went through and destroyed a lot of stained glass in the churches, the Puritan, that kind of thing, and they. At Wells, they destroyed some, but a lot of the windows are up high, so they couldn't get to them. The ones they did destroy, they've restored, and they just took all the pieces and put them back together. So you've got some windows, especially in the Lady Chapel back there, that are just a conglomeration of different things, and they don't really make a whole lot of sense. Luckily, that Jesse window was up real high. You saw it in the choir. Let me go back. See how high up it is? Way up there. There's the Jesse window from the choir. This is, if you go on through, this is the Lady Chapel, and that's where the ones that were destroyed were, mostly because they were so low. So this is the main altar, and we're about to go around into the Lady Chapel. Here's going out to the north side and around the back. This is the Lady Chapel. Those are chapels that were built sort of after the fact, and they're dedicated to the Virgin Mary. The central theme in the ceiling is Christ on the throne here. This is the floor tiles. I don't take too many pictures of the floor tiles because I am busy sort of looking up usually instead of at my feet, but they're gorgeous. You see the lamb in the middle. Okay, let's talk about the chapter house. When you go from the Lady Chapel around to the north transept, you're going to pass through the chapter, or by the stairway that goes up to the chapter house. The chapter house is where the canon, the people that ran the cathedral met. One of the reasons that Wells Cathedral survived the Reformation was there were several. You had some of the Catholic churches in England were official like monasteries, so you had monks and more of a formal order at those. But at some of the cathedrals, because it was after the fall of the Roman Empire and Rome sort of pulled out, so there was sort of a break between the Christianity in England, and as the missionaries came back through and started the churches and stuff in 700 or so, 900 as it went on, they had fewer people involved, and they had secular canons, or it was not a monastic order that ran the cathedral, it was more of a lay person. And in those cases, those tended to survive better. They didn't get looted as bad, and they were just converted straight over sort of to the Church of England. This is very simple. I'm telling you this is just what I've picked up in reading about this, is why in the world did some of these places survive and some of them didn't, because you've got ruins of them everywhere, and it's fascinating to me that these places survived. So anyway, the chapter was secular at Wells, and this is where they meet. And look at that, the warrant. This is sort of a famous picture. If you pull up Wells on the internet, you're going to see this picture probably. But this is the steps going up to the chapter house where the canons and the dean and the bishops they met, or the bishop met. Look at the wearing of the steps there. So you go on up, and this is the chapter house. It's got a central pillar, and it's got a octagonal, 8 sides. And each of these seats they had assigned seats, so you'll see their names above them. There's a lot of good carving in the chapter house too. Some of the stonemasons didn't like some of the people that ran the place, apparently. This is in the ceiling, the bosses up there. Look at the different color marble. You've got black marble and then the white. The stone was quarried nearby, but the black marble was brought in. And then this stairway goes on up, and there's a bridge that was built over to the Vicar's Close, which is where all the canons and the choristers, the people that sang the services lived, was that street, that medieval street I was telling you about a while ago. That's where you go on up from the chapter house here to the bridge across the road. Okay, I'm going to skip that. We'll come back to that in a minute. The Wells clock. There's a clock in Wells. It's the second oldest in England. It was built in 1348, I believe. I want to play this for y'all, because he can explain it a little better than I can.
Because they thought that the earth was the centre of the universe. Therefore, the centre of the clock, see where the
can you see the
round, that represents the earth. Round the earth goes the sun, taking 24 hours to do so. So if you find the outer dial, there is the sun at 2 o'clock. That goes round once in 24 hours. The minute hand is shown by a star going round, which is almost at the top. The third dial is the lunar dial, which shows where you are in the lunar cycle. It's pointing at 21, and if you looked at the moon tonight, that is what it looks like.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I need to back it up just a little bit so you can see this guy. See his feet kicking? So we have the clock, you have the knights jousting every 15 minutes. They go around. And then Jack, in this case, they call them steeplejacks, or it's typical to see an automaton that's ringing the bell be called Jack, but this one's Jack. He's got a last name. It's Blandifer, and they don't know why. They think the guy that carved him was named Mr. Bland, so they named him Jack Blandifer. So this is a view from the top. Watch the guy get hit. Only one of those little men have been replaced since the beginning. Those are original, except the guy that gets knocked over. He's been replaced. Okay, so I'm just going to go through. There's a symbol of, it's Phoebe, they call it. It's another name for the moon. The moon, by the way, you can see how this is a little bit of a crescent moon. The moon shape shows you what the moon looks like that night if you see it there on the clock. It's sort of cool. I love a medieval clock. The corners have the winds, the 4 winds. This is an embroidery version of the clock that's in the choir. There's our knights. There's Jack Blandifer. There's also an outside clock. There's cables that go from the inside clock to the outside clock. So if you're standing outside the building, you'll see that. That's on the side where the vicar's close is, and we'll talk about that. That's where the folks lived that did all the services, and so the clock would tell them it was time to walk across the bridge and get into the church. There's the bridge. The chapter house is there. There's the bridge, and here's the close. There it is again. So we're going to walk through that. There's the stairs going up to the chapter house stairs. There's the vicar's close. There's a chapel at the end. The oldest occupied medieval street in Europe is there. Okay, we're coming back to the church now. That was the vicar's close. That was real quick, wasn't it? Okay, we'll go through. We're going over to the south transept. There are a lot of tombs in the church. This guy, his last name was something Hare, H-A-R-E, so he put rabbits carved at his feet. Some beautiful work here. There's the font. It's in the south transept. This is
relic in the church, right, Deanna?
Pardon?
It's the oldest relic in the church, is what I understand.
I don't know that one.
Wikipedia was telling me that. That may or may not be authentic.
The font itself, that's cool.
Supposedly the oldest artifact, yeah.
It's interesting. Okay, thank you. That's the thing, there's so much to learn about these places because they've been around forever. Okay, there's also, I'm going to go through it real quick. The entrance to the chained library. Did anybody watch Game of Thrones by chance? There was a chained library, and Sam went up to do research in the chained library. The chained library there, it doesn't have medieval manuscripts at this place in particular because they were destroyed by at the Civil War. But everything in here is before 1800, prior to 1800. So they chained the books so people wouldn't walk off with them. Now I'm going to go through the cloisters real quick. That's on the south side as well. This is where the people that lived there, the choristers, the canons, would do their studying. They could sit out there where it was warm. They could write when they had light there. There's some nice carvings in there as well. That's one of the oldest doors in England. There's a piper. An owl. That's the middle, the garden of the cloisters is, a lot of the cemetery is there. Now we're going to go up into the attic. I've got a few more minutes. Okay, the tracing floor, there's only 2 medieval tracing floors in the country. That's where the masons would make their patterns to send to the folks, the apprentices and the guys that were doing the work downstairs of how to make those columns. And they've done this is the pattern of the scratches that are showing in that floor that's up in the attic. There's the floor itself. You can see the work in it. So they would lay out their patterns there to make those columns where you see the grooves in the columns. Just looking over here. They did a flat plane pattern, and the stonework knew how to do it as they were building it. There's the stencil for the ceiling painting. This is the mechanism of the clock. The original mechanism, the second oldest in England, was replaced back in the 1800s by this one. And that is in the Science Museum in London. The oldest clock is at Salisbury Cathedral, and it's actually still at the cathedral. And I was so excited to see that, but it looks like a bunch of pulleys and levers and gears and stuff. It's not a pretty face like this one is here, but you're just seeing the guts of it at Salisbury. So those of you that are going with the troop to Salisbury will get to see that one, I think. Up until 2010, somebody wound that clock by hand. It took them an hour 3 times a week to go and do that. And it was a family thing. It was the 3rd generation that had been doing it, and he finally decided to retire, so they made an electrical winder. But they still have the key there to show you. Okay, this is the view from the attic looking out through the nave. Let's talk about the west front. Let's see, I should have I don't know when I'm supposed to talk about that. The west front, let's see if I can get over to it. I think I've messed up. These are openings. There are 2 sets of openings that you can see from the attic. I'm going backwards here. This is the lower set. So those statues in the front, you know how we process in on Palm Sunday into the church? So you've got all the people on the green in front of the cathedral processing in. Well, they have these openings behind those statues on the west front. And the lower row is for the choristers. So they would send their singers up there, and they would sing out of these holes from behind the angels. And then the level up above that was trumpeters. And we're talking, the medieval trumpets that you see, they're the long ones that have the banners hanging from them. Those would come out the top. So if you're walking through there at Palm Sunday, you'd have the singing and the brass coming from the front of the church that was all painted and beautiful. And these are the openings that the choristers sang through. They've got some doves that have nested in them. And then here is the very top above the nave. You can walk down and see down at the very end, you can see the openings start to show for the trumpets. There we go. Okay, that's what I was looking for. These are the trumpet holes. And then the chorister holes are hidden down here behind these columns. So the medieval folks, that's the beauty of a cathedral. They were built for people that couldn't read. They didn't have any kind of, way of learning except coming to the church. And there's so many visual aids for people that couldn't read. You have the symbolism, you have the things like this that show them what heaven would be like. That's what the cathedrals were. That's one of the reasons they built these towers and stuff, to get as close to God as they could. Salisbury has the tallest spire in the country, which is just down the road. So you get a little bit of competition between Salisbury and Wells. I was lucky enough, after going to these tours for a while, I was lucky enough to be there Palm Sunday this year. So they had one chorister up there and singing out of the holes, but at least he was up there. Okay, I'm going to come out of the cathedral and go into the Bishop's Palace. That's the entrance to the Bishop's Palace. There's a moat. This is where the part of the spring that goes through town, the well, comes from the Bishop's Palace garden. It was built in, I think, 1210. They started building it in 1210. I'm going to have to zip through this. Okay, this is the interior of the palace itself. It has a chapel. They also have dress-up clothes in there for the kids. So my friend and I were there last year and we dressed up. There were some other ladies that were there and they dressed up. It was fun. So there we go. So we have the Bishop's Palace, and then you go through here to the gardens. Oh, here's the chapel. That's the roof. Then we're back in the gardens back here. There's the water from the wells. There's the cathedral. Here it is. It's an artesian well. It just comes up out of the ground. This is the source of it right here. This is where it starts. You can see this is the Lady Chapel in the background, the back part of the back side of the Lady Chapel. It's 2,000 gallons per minute, all day, every day. It's unbelievable, the amount of water that comes out of that thing.
It hasn't moved since when?
Well, it was Roman times is when they settled it. So it's been going all that time. There's a playground with a nice little dragon. Swans live in the moat. Swans belong to the queen. Nobody can touch swans, or the king in this case now. That's still true. Here's the feeder to the moat. This is on the way. There's a cafe there at the Bishop's Palace. There's also one at the cathedral, by the way. They were playing cricket that day when I left. This is coming back out into the main medieval square. There's the Bishop's Palace gatehouse. There's a penniless porch. They have a market. This is modern day Wells now. They have a market there every Wednesday and Saturday. Cool stuff. I got a nice old Book of Common Prayer from a guy that was selling antique books. Okay, I found this out this last trip I was there in March. This is called a leat. It's a little channel that runs down the street in town. Have any of you heard of that? Have you ever heard of it? Have you? I was fascinated. Wells is famous for theirs. One of the bishops at some point made it to where the water would run out into the town so that the people didn't, they had access to it after he built the wall around the Bishop's Palace, I assume. And the well, it comes out, some of the water comes out here. It's not always running there, but it always comes down the street, the leat. And that goes all the way, see it right here? I'm moving a block or two away from that square, and you've still got the water running down the street there. This is the view of the cathedral from one of the hotels that the choir is going to be staying at. They have their little garden, outdoor eating area. I mean, we're right there at it. The Swan Hotel. Who's staying at the Swan? Anybody in here?
Most of us.
Okay, this is the north gate. The chapter house is right down that way. There's Basil the Cat again. There's the White Hart Hotel. That's where I'm staying, which is right next door to the Swan. There's the Swan. Look at the Swan. They have some cool shops in Wells. There you go. That's the town symbol. That's it.